The Mighty Miss Malone, Chapter 14. The Sad Truth About Jokes. Clarice was early. I was sitting on the couch reading when she tapped on the door. You ready? She had her books in her arms. We hugged and I said, Just a second, Clarice. Take your time. I want to read the last chapter once more anyway. I ran up the steps to my room to get the books. I had to return to the library. Me and Jimmy had started taking turns staying with Father. I'd go to the library with Clarice every other day, and Jimmy would go over to Dr. Bracey's and out to the fields to get wild vegetables on the days it wasn't his turn to watch Father. I started to stick my head into Mother and Father's room to say goodbye. Jimmy and Father were whispering. Whispers grab hold of your attention like nothing else. Me and Father never talked about what happened on the lake, so I was surprised to hear him say, There we're on Lake Myth again, pulling in fifth right and left. Jimmy said, Perch, walleye, and bluegilleth. We noteth a fog bank further out on the lake, and though some thought we would head back, but we stayed a little longer. He stopped. I held my breath, waiting for what he was about to say. But Jimmy said, Why is it called a fog bank, Pa? It's not like you could get a loan there, or like you could rob it, or nothing. Father said, Not a bank in that way, Jim. More like a mound, an area higher than what'eth around it. I bet he was staring over Jimmy's shoulder, trying to get deep into the story. I stuck my head in the room. I didn't really want to hear this. Goodbye, Father. I'm off to the library. No, Detha, come in and listen too. Jimmy said, Pause telling what happened out on the lake. Father said, We weren't out there for half an hour before the fog rolled in. Father was talking, but he wasn't talking to us. I'd never thought about what a strange but with the fog covered our boat, I got it. The fog felt like it had weight, that you had to put it away to even breathe. There was a long pause, and I held my breath, hoping that Jimmy would be quiet too. We decided to get back to Thor, but when we pulled on the anchor rope, we found the anchor was gone, and we'd been drifting. No one knew for how long. Then the thip came. Then everything happened. His voice changed, sounding like he was fighting to catch his breath, sounding wild and scary. We drifted into the thippy lance, and the wake from a huge freighter hit us and knocked everyone out of the boat. I was in such a state of shock that I didn't even realize I'd been hit in the mouth and all of my front teeth were gone, or how badly I'd been cut. Fear will do that to you. It will make you think about only what is important. And all that was important to me was to get back to my family. That is all I could think of, truly. Most times when Father tells about how his day went, he talks like he's painting a picture, but this time there was no picture, just fog. If he was himself, Father would have said something like, The fog was so thick, it should have been spelled with two G's. But there was something more missing. Father couldn't open his mouth without a joke falling out, and this story didn't have any. Maybe it's because the story is so sad, but Father always tells us there's a thin, blurry line between humor and tragedy. When he was working regular at the mill, he told me and Jimmy, I'll give you each one of you a whole nickel for every joke you find that isn't cloaked in pain or tragedy. We'd tried as hard as we could to earn that nickel, but couldn't come up with a single joke that didn't have someone being killed or getting hurt or making fun of or embarrassed or mocked. Father told us, and the more tragic something is, the more jokes you'll find out about. I couldn't think of anything more tragic than what happened to those poor men out on Lake Michigan, yet Father's story didn't have one smile or laugh in it, and no alliteration. Something wasn't right. Father said that boat was upside down and they all were gone. I tried to writh to the boat with the anchor rope and hung on. That is the way the ship found me and took me to the hospital in Chicago. When I came to, they brought me to Gary. That is the whole truth. There was another long pause. That is everything. Jimmy leaned his head on Father's chest. It's okay, Pa. We're all together now. Father didn't sound like his heart was in it when he said, "You know, Jimmy, when it looked like I wouldn't live, the thing other than my family that I thought about mithing would be seeing Joe Louis knock Max Thelming out to the fatherland. That stupid fight. Father started babbling about Joe Louis, and Jimmy blabbed right along with him. I said yuck and left them laughing and joking. Chapter 15. The Brown Bomber Hits Home. Finally, Father made the bug about the fight grab hold of my heart. The big day had been postponed to the 19th because of rain that had made everything even more exciting. Since the lake, Father had acted like he was listening when we'd talk about our days during chow chat, but we knew his mind wasn't all the way with us. Just 2 days before the fight, something came alive within him. We looked at Father to see if he was up and talking. Jimmy saw something that me and Mother didn't. He said, "And what about your day, my fine, friendly father figure?" Father seemed surprised. Not much happened. Then he gave us his scary jack-o'-lantern smile. But I have noticed my Dardwat and gorgeous, gregarious, glamorous Diza hasn't found fit to form the flimmiest conversation concerning the coming fisticus. Alliteration, a lot of alliteration. It was like all of the consonants he hadn't used for the past weeks were exploding out of him. Jimmy laughed. "Wow, Daddy." Father said, if none of you mind, I think I'll use my time to explain to the mighty Miss Malone what's going on that she has so little interest in. He looked right at me. The first time in a long time he looked any of us in the eye. "So, Dardwat, why aren't you on the bandwagon about Joe Louis?" "Clarice and me," Mother said. Deza. "I and Clarice." "Not funny, Deza," Mother said. "Clarice and I don't think there's anything about two grown old bumpy muscled men in their underwear trying to kill each other with big fat puffy ridiculous red mittens that's good or important or even worth talking about." Father put his face in his hand and shook his head. Jimmy said, "And I thought you were smart, Deza. Even white people are saying they'd vote for the brown bomber to be king of the world after he whips Smelling." Father moved his hand from his face and stared over Mother's shoulder. Another real good sign because that meant he was settling into a story or a lesson. "Deza, this is so much more than just a fight. This is one of those rare occasions where we'll be alive to witness history." He smiled at me and stuck his left hand out. I put both of mine in it, and he covered my hands with his right one. I was surprised at how soft Father's hands felt. They used to be rough like sandpaper or even a hunk of wood, but since the lake, they'd gotten soft as mine. Father looked real close at our hands and said, my, wasn't it only yesterday that I could close my fingers on yours like this and your whole hand would disappear?" He was right. My fingers were poking out of the other side of his hands. He brought our hands to his face and kissed my fingertips. "Dot, you know you and I are different, right?" "Of course, Father. You're a man. I'm a girl. You're old and I'm young." Jimmy said, "Yeah, Pa, plus Deza's got regular teeth and you got them summer teeth. Some are in your mouth, some are in the bottom of Lake Michigan, some are still in the hospital." Mother said, "Jimmy." Father said, "I see both of my children are reading from that book about disrespecting and abusing a good man. Deza, I meant to say you and I are alike because we're different than most people." "Yes, Father, we know the Malones aren't like any other family in the world." "True, but even within the Malone family, you and I look at the world in a way that your mother and brother don't." Jimmy, Mother, and me all said, "Thank goodness for that." Father laughed. "Good, we're agreed. I hope we can also agree that people tend to leave a trail as to where they've been and from what trail you can tell where they're going, right?" "Yes, Father." "All right," Father said. Another thing we need to get by is faith in one another. Over time, we can tell if someone is reliable or not, if we can count on their word or not, right?" Father was starting to come back. This was the way he used to talk. And what he was doing was something he'd taught us to be suspicious of. He said that people use tricks to get you to think the way they do or to take away something you have that they want. One way they do that is to interrupt your normal way of thinking and take you by the hand and guide you down the path they want you to take. Father says they make you take a teeny weeny step in their direction, and then they start to nudge you a little further down the path, and before you know it, you're running full speed with them in a direction that you probably wouldn't have gone all alone. If someone was trying to pull that trick on one of us, Father had come up with a signal. We would take both hands and pretend they were on a steering wheel and move them back and forth like we were driving. It was called being a passenger in the Manipula-mobile, and it let all the other Malones know someone was trying to take us for a ride. I said, "Father," and put my hands on the pretend steering wheel. He laughed. "Very good, Dardwat. I was waiting for you to do that, which is why I preface this by telling you that over time you know whom you can have faith in, right?" "Yes, Father, because I want you to consider the source here. Keep in mind that I'm the one trying to educate you on why this fight is so important. There's no manipulomobile on the road here. Are we reading from the same book?" We were. It was so good to hear Father explaining something to me again. "And it's a fact, Deza. Jimmy, sometimes getting educated on a subject has a lot in common with being manipulated. The main difference is that you know to trust who's guiding you." "I understand," I said. "Great. Here's why this is more than just a fight. Sad to say, the boxing ring is one of the few places in America where your skin color doesn't play a huge role. When you've got two men going against each other wearing a pair of ridiculous puffy mittens most of the time, it's a reasonably fair fight." Father looked over Jimmy's shoulder. "Steel Lung used to say it was the only place where a black man could hit a white man and not get lynched for it." We all held our breaths to see if he was talking about Mr. Steel Lung was going to make him stop or take him back out on that lake. He looked at Mother and said, "Hitler and his boys have said this fight will prove that no man can ever beat a white man. That we," Father pointed at each Malone, "and all our neighbors are where we are because we deserve to be here." Jimmy said, "Yeah, Pops, I can't wait. Joe's going to show him a thing or two." Father said, "That's what we're hoping for, James. Joe knows who's got to win this fight. He knows how important it is. He'll come through. Some of the time, life boils down to some pretty ridiculous things, Deza. This is one of them. I agree, it's silly to put so much importance on one fight, but you have to keep in mind that this fight is the one chance we have to show the Nazis and some of our white brethren here in America as well that we are people too. It's ironic, but Joe will show we're human by savagely beating and stuffing out of someone." I would have believed anything my father was saying because it was his own strong voice. I was going to have faith in Father's word. I was going to try to make a light come on for Clarice because the more I thought about it, the madder I got at myself for not seeing this on my own. The man on the radio screamed, "The greatest upset in the history of the world! The greatest upset in the history of the world! The greatest upset in the history of the world!" Mr. Bobbin reached over and turned off his radio. No one in the barber shop moved or talked or even breathed for what felt like an hour. No one looked at anyone else. The most interesting thing in Mr. Bobbin's barber shop was the floor. Because I was looking around, that was where everybody's eyes were pointing. The only thing making a sound or moving was the fan as it swept from side to side. The bell over Mr. Bobbin's door gave that gentle tingling as people started leaving. Mother grabbed Father's arm, tapped Jimmy and Clarice on the shoulder, and nodded at me. The bell tinkled again, and we followed Mother and Father outside. I hope to never see anything else as terrible as that walk home. Grown men and women were sitting on the curb crying like babies. Every light in every store and house we passed was still on, but now they threw jaggedy, sharp shadows onto the street. Father's lisp was back. "I can't believe it, Peg. It's like that fog on the lake. I never thought I'd see or feel anything like that again. But here it ith. This ith just ath heavy on my heart. This ith the same thing. Oh God, Peg, why won't I ever get rid of this? Ith something wrong with me?" Mother wrapped her arm around Father's shoulder. Clarice was squeezing my left hand, and Jimmy was squeezing my right as we walked. Father said, "What is going?" I looked back, and Mother shushed Father. "Wait till we get home. It will be okay." We walked in silence for a couple of blocks and saw a huge bottle that someone had dropped or slammed onto the sidewalk. It had broken to 1,000 little puddles of light. The only way you could tell it had been a bottle was because the label on it was still whole, still hanging on to a few sharp jags of glass. Jimmy pointed and said, "Look out!" Father scooped me into his arms. "Detha, you know how you are with broken glass." I almost said, "Father, I'm okay." But then I saw that he was holding me as much to take care of himself as to take care of me. I let my father carry me like a doll on his hip. I leaned into his neck and Mother grabbed his waist. It was strange. I was squeezing him, but it seemed like I couldn't feel him. I was so frightened. When we got to Clarice's, she let Jimmy's hand go and looked up at me in Father's arms. At the same time, we put up 2 fingers, touched our cheeks, then put up 1 finger and put our hands on our chest. I didn't notice 6 or 7 of Clarice's brothers sitting on the porch in a little ball crying until the Malones started for home.